Erica grew up in South Africa, where she completed a degree in history at the University of Witwatersrand. I practiced that. A non-racial university. Erica completed several Jewellery Council of South Africa courses, including antique jewelry, pearl identification, and grading and gem identification. Erica also earned 2 certificates from the Cape Town University for Internet Marketing and Financial Management for non-financial managers. It was Erica's desire to create her own identity away from the family business that shaped the next 14 years. Erica established herself in the tourism industry in South Africa. It was during this time Erica met her Canadian-British husband, Mitch, and moved to Calgary to start a new life. While adjusting to her new home, Erica realized that she missed her first love, dabbling in collecting and sharing this with other like-minded collectors. Erica also wanted her parents to be able to enjoy what Canada had to offer, and it was these 2 factors that influenced Erica's decision to bring the family business to Canada. With the help of her husband Mitch, Erica was able to unite the family in Calgary and start to lay the foundations of learning about collecting in Canada. 2 years ago, Laveau Vintage Canada was established, finally bringing the knowledge and expertise of Jeff, Corinne, and Erica together once again. Erica's talk tonight will be on Carl Faberge, with a particular focus on the story of craftsmanship behind the Russian Imperial Easter eggs. This will include a brief history of the man himself and his workshop, as well as some of his prominent gold and silversmiths and the amazing techniques and materials that they harnessed. At this time, please join me in welcoming Erica Jago.
Can everybody hear me? Because okay, I've got some thumbs up. Great. I have an accent, so forgive me if you don't understand exactly what I say. Please raise your hand, and I'm happy to repeat myself. So as Ken alluded to, I had the privilege of growing up in a family business. My father's a jeweler, a craftsman by trade, and I think through running around the workshop at the age of, I don't know, 3 or 4, I got to see firsthand what a jeweler, a craftsman had to create. And I think it's probably the combination of that and my mum being an antique dealer that I probably by default developed an interest in arts and crafts and design. And then during the, well, let's just say as I was growing up, of course, the likes of Mikhail Gorbachev was trying very hard to get rid of that cloak, that iron curtain that Russia and the Cold War and the rest of us didn't know anything about what was going on in Russia. And I think because of this combination of my family being craftsmen and of course this onslaught of information coming onto the market about what was happening in Russia, I think I just fell in love with what was going on with Faberge and the works that he had created. So the love that I have for Faberge is just purely an interest. I probably will never have the privilege of actually holding one, let alone actually owning a piece. And I shall share with you some of the prices of what Faberge goes for today, if you can even find them on the market. So let's get, everybody can hear me, you're all covered, great. So Carl Faberge was born in 1846 in St. Petersburg in Russia. He was born into a jewelry making family, and it was a natural progression for him to go into the business. During 1864 and 1866, Faberge embarked on a grand tour of Europe. And this is quite significant in terms of how he develops his style. He goes to England, he goes to Italy, he goes to France. Can you hear me all right? Great. Thank you. Sorry, I just see somebody. I have a hearing problem, so I know how frustrating it is if you can't hear. So anyway, he's doing this grand tour of Europe, and he learns about traditional jewelry techniques. He learns about modern jewelry techniques, and this is again quite significant when you see how he develops his own style. He returns to Russia, and in 1872 takes over the family business, and of course gets married. He works with many fine craftsmen, and at the height of his business, he has over 500 people working for him. He continues to hone his skills, and he draws on inspirations from the collections amassed in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. In fact, Faberge is commissioned by the Imperial Cabinet to restore damaged objects, appraise new acquisitions, and in actual fact draw up an inventory of everything that is in the Hermitage. Anybody had the privilege of going to the Hermitage? It's on my bucket list. Lucky people, I want to go there one day. It's the experience that Faberge gains while doing this work in the Hermitage that again influences the work that he does in later years. So he's a shrewd businessman, and he creates pieces that are distinguished by consummate technical mastery and enormous inventiveness in design. Most of his creations are one-offs and very expensive luxury articles. He was far more receptive to fashion trends than any of his competitors, and he created modern technical devices like a personalized electric doorbell. Jewelry was not really Faberge's forte, and being the entrepreneurial genius that he was, he would not waste time competing with the likes of Cartier and Boucheron, who were establishing themselves at this time in Paris and in Moscow. Instead, he rather used his inventiveness to create objects for display in large showcases. His creations were first seen in 1882 at the Pan-Slavic exhibition in Moscow under the patronage of Tsar Alexander III. Faberge not only captured the interest of the Tsarina, but also the press, who enthusiastically wrote about him as craftsman. As we see, Mr. Faberge opens up a new era in jewelry making. We wish him all the best in his efforts to bring back into the realm of art what used to be part of it. We hope that from now on, thanks to our renowned jeweler, the value of objects will be measured not by the value of the precious stone, not by wealth alone, but by their artistic form. And this is one of the defining features of Faberge. Yes, he uses incredible materials, but he creates fantasies. Faberge was awarded a gold medal for his exhibits with the sign of imperial favor. So let's just recap some of the salient features that we've just talked about that set Faberge up for success. He grows up in a jewelry making business. He has this grand tour where he learns great techniques, one of which, and I'll show you some examples, is called guilloche. He has exposure to the collections that are amassed in the Hermitage. The Hermitage was actually, the collections were actually started by Catherine the Great in 1794, and they were then opened up to the public in 1852. So you can imagine the collections of what he had at his disposal. He differentiates himself from his competitors. He doesn't want to focus on just jewelry. He wants to focus on these grand objects for display. He captures the attention of the royal family, and he's a perfectionist. there's a story, and I'm not quite sure how true this is, that it takes about 18, maybe 16 to 18 months to create one of these eggs. And the story goes that Faberge, the perfectionist, would be presented with the final article, and if he wasn't happy with it, he would take a hammer and smash it to smithereens. I don't know how true that is, but it's a great story. So in 1885, Tsar Alexander III commissions Faberge to make an Easter egg for his wife, the Tsarina, to celebrate their 20th year of anniversary. Since the second millennium, the egg has symbolized Easter and the resurrection of Christ for the Orthodox Russian. Be it the peasant, be it the emperor, eggs have been exchanged for all those years. The first imperial egg was probably inspired by a French 18th century ivory surprise egg in the collection of the Tsarina's father, King Christian IX of Denmark. This would become one of Faberge's trademarks, is that he would try and make his eggs, and I'm talking specifically the imperial eggs, so the eggs that he made for the royal family, would always have a very personal message in them. The first imperial egg, or the hen egg, was well received by the Tsarina. It is by far the most simplest of all the eggs that Faberge would go on to make. Faberge won the trust of the Tsar and was granted total liberty in the creation of his imperial eggs. But there were three conditions. One, it always had to be egg-shaped. Two, there always needed to be a surprise. And three, he could never repeat the theme of the egg. So Faberge would go on to create 50 imperial eggs, and again, just imperial meaning pertaining just to the royal family, until the royal family, till their demise as a result of the Russian Revolution. But before we continue to look at some of these eggs, let's look at the times, the socio-political situation that Faberge was creating in. Tsar Alexander III was a big burly man and ruled Russia with an iron fist, as have generations of emperors before him. After all, you don't rule an eighth of the world's population without fear and deprivation as a tool. Near the turn of the century, the differences between the very rich and the very poor were becoming more and more obsolete. 8 million peasants barely eked out an existence on the land. In the cities, working conditions in the developing industries were intolerable. The Tsars ruled by divine right and determined to rule absolutely, despite the continued demand for social change. But by the end of the 19th century, we see that 300 years of autocracy under the Romanov rule is about to change. In 1894, the Tsar's health fails, and he suddenly dies in the prime of his life. And his son Nicholas is unwilling to take on the throne. Untrained in the business of ruling and statesmanship, and deliberately cut off from the progressive thinking by his parents, Nicholas embraces the limited ideals of order and tradition. He felt that the best course of action was to carry on ruling just as his father had. After all, he adored his father, he loved his father, he trusted his father. So why not? Let's continue what we know, an autocratic rule. Along with the tradition that Tsar Nicholas decides to follow is, of course, giving the Easter egg. So now when Tsar Nicholas II comes to power, Faberge is making 2 eggs every year. One for his mother, the Tsarina, or she's now called the Dowager, Tsarina Maria Feodorovna. I have to think about that name, getting my tongue around it. And then there's the Tsar Nicholas's wife, who's the Tsarina Alexander. I'm going to show you a video right now. It just looks at 9 eggs of the 50. The reason I've chosen this video is because I think you get to see the detail, the style, and just the scale of these eggs. Because in a book like this, you don't get to understand the scale and the size of these eggs. The video is a compliment of the Russian, a museum in Russia in St. Petersburg, the Faberge Museum. It's in Russian. I'm going to pause it and talk you through some of the eggs, but enjoy. So this museum was opened in 2013, and it was the collection of a gentleman, a Russian industrialist, businessman, Victor Valensberg. So this is the First Imperial Egg. It's 2.5 inches high. As I said, it's a very modest egg. White enamel. The inside is a gold yolk. And inside the yolk is a little gold and silver hen. The hen has a little eye as a ruby, or ruby as an eye. Originally, the hen would have had a surprise inside. It would have been a diamond-encrusted imperial crown with a little ruby pendant hanging from it. And we know this from inventory notes and invoices that were released in the 1990s, but somehow these surprises have been lost over the years. I love the little feet on this, the details, unbelievable. This is known, oh, excuse me. Sorry, might have trouble. That was the Coronation Egg, and we'll get there in a minute, and I can't fast forward, so forgive me if you don't mind seeing this again. Are there any questions so far while I replay this part of the video? Only 43 are known to exist, so 7 are missing, and we don't know where they are. And if we have time at the end, in terms of question and answers, I'll tell you about one of the most recent finds, because everybody in this room being a collector will appreciate that story. Does anybody have an idea what these eggs go for? I've told a few people, so that you can't answer, that's cheating. But bear that in mind, towards the end we'll chat about pricing. Okay, back to the Coronation Egg. So this egg was made in presented in 1897. It's 5 inches in height. And the symbolism, I mentioned the symbolism, this work here is meant to mimic the gold cloth that the Tsarina wore to the coronation. So we're bringing in the very personal aspect that Faberge becomes known of. This yellow here is what we call the guilloche work. Guilloche is basically, it's another word for engine turned. So the actual base metal is engraved, and then Faberge overlays a translucent enamel. And he becomes so good at this, it becomes one of his signature techniques. And you'll see that in all the eggs that we see. And he actually develops a palette of 140 colors that none of his competitors have at the time. This black here is the double-headed eagle, which is the symbol of the Romanov family. I mean, the detail, unbelievable, what this man creates. Notice as he opens the egg is lined inside with velvet. Now this surprise is an exact replica of the carriage that takes the Tsarina to the coronation ceremony. It is believed that the detail on here, let's just get my little pointer out here. Can you see my pointer? Yes, great. So this little detail here is diamonds. The backdrop is what they call a strawberry enamel. The wheels, the whole carriage is made out of gold, and then the wheels are detailed with platinum. At the top here is a little replica of an imperial crown encrusted with diamonds, and there was believed to be a little surprise hanging from that crown, a little ruby pendant, but that's been lost over the years. The windows are believed to be made out, or are made out of rock crystal, and they're engraved. There are C-shaped shock absorbers on this little carriage, would you believe? And this here are a little pair of stairs, set of stairs that fold out. This is the bay tree. It originally was misidentified and called the orange tree, but because of those inventory notes and the invoices that have been released, we know that this is now the bay tree. It was presented in 1911. It's 10.5 inches in height when closed, and the little top opens, and when that opens, it's 11.5 inches high. The actual leaves are made out of nephrite. In fact, I'll just put my little laser pointer on. So the little leaves here are made out of nephrite. The detail on the little box here is enamel. The base of that box is made out of rock crystal. And on the side here, there's a little fruit that's just been, there's a little lever inside there, but they actually made it into a piece of fruit so that you can't see the lever. And the lever then turns and the little top opens and a little bird comes out with wings, it flaps its wings and it sings. Now, one of the things about Faberge is he had these great ideas about the fantasy pieces he was going to make, but there wasn't necessarily the technology in place in order to create them. But no trouble to Faberge, he makes his craftsmen sit there and find a way. So the little ball of the tree actually holds the bellows that make the bird sing in this egg. Listen carefully because you'll hear the bird sing. This is known as the rosebud egg, and Tsar Nicholas absolutely adored his wife. He loved her beyond, as any good man would love his wife. But she was terribly homesick. She arrived at Russian court. She didn't understand the culture. She didn't understand the dress code. She didn't understand the etiquette. She was very unhappy when she first arrived. And Tsar Nicholas has this egg created for her to help her feel more at home. I'm going to switch on my little laser pointer here. These little arrows are supposed to be the arrows of Cupid. Have a look at the detail here, that guilloche work that I mentioned. The repetitive patterns of the engraving and then overlaid with translucent enamel. The surprise inside is an enameled yellow rose, and that's meant to symbolize the rose garden that the Tsarina grew up with as a child. The little surprise in this egg inside the flower is missing, and we think it probably was a cabochon ruby pendant. This is my favorite egg. It's known as the Lily of the Valley egg, and Faberge, true to form, knew that the Tsarina every springtime filled the palace with fresh cut flowers, and this is meant to symbolize those flowers that the Tsarina filled the palace with. It was presented in 1898. It's 5 inches in height when closed and 7 when it's opened. Tsar Nicholas II gave it to his wife, and it's in the Art Nouveau style. It's only one of 2 eggs that Faberge creates in the Art Nouveau style. And forgive me if I'm saying the obvious, Art Nouveau is a style that took its inspiration from nature. It's very feminine, it has lots of flowing lines, and typical here, let me just switch my little pointer on. He uses the guilloche work again. He creates this rose pink enamel, and then this special green enamel for the leaves. The little flowers are pearls, and the petals are diamonds. This is an imperial crown at the top encrusted with diamonds, and then there's 3 portraits, one of Tsar Nicholas II, and then their 2 oldest daughters, Grand Duchess Olga and Grand Duchess Tatiana. Note this little section here. This is the little lever, and the man in the video will show you that he opens it up and closes it using that little lever. This is the cockerel egg. It was presented in 1900. The detail on here, see the guilloche work that I mentioned, that repetitive patterning? This is 8 inches in height. This is the Renaissance egg that's presented in 1894 by Tsar Alexander III to his wife Maria Feodorovna. It's 5.5 inches high. It's a rock crystal with the enamel work on the outside. The surprise is missing. And there's a couple of theories on the surprise. We think there may have been a string of pearls, or we think that maybe this, which is known as the resurrection egg, might fit inside. And there's 3 reasons why it might fit inside. 1, it does fit. 2, it's in the same style. And 3, this resurrection egg doesn't have an inventory number. This is known as the Kelch hen egg. It's the only one in this video that's not an imperial egg. It's made for an industrialist, Alexander Kelch, for his wife, Barbara Kelch Bazanova. The little surprise is not original to the egg. It is a Faberge piece, but it's a portrait of the Tsarevich Alexei. The original portrait would have been of Barbara Kelch, Bazanova. This is the Cross of St. George egg, or also known as the Order of St. George. It was presented to the Dowager, Maria Feodorovna, in 1916. So we're in World War I. Coming across materials is it's not easy, so it's a lot more austere. It doesn't have all the detail that the other eggs have. It's still enamel work though. It's the last egg that the Dowager Tsarina will receive. It has a portrait of the Tsar and the Tsarevich on the other side. Faberge made hundreds and thousands of items. This is one that's a cigarette case, and they were often given as gifts during royal tours. Does anybody have any questions about those eggs? So, as I alluded to, there was great dissatisfaction brewing in Russia from a socio-political point of view. There is a leader by all accounts, is a great father, a devoted husband, but he's a very naive leader, and he's ill-prepared. He is the father of a haemophiliac, and this anguish causes the royal family they just don't know what to do with themselves. And Tsar Nicholas's reaction is that he takes refuge within his family. He doesn't want to have anything to do with public life. In 1904, 1905, Russia's involved in the war with Japan, and they suffer greatly, a great defeat. Sunday, January 22, 1905, there's a peaceful protest to present the Tsar with a list of complaints about working conditions in the factories. The Tsar has taken refuge in his family. He doesn't want to have anything to do with public life. The protesters start getting a bit anxious. The Imperial Guards get nervous, and they open fire on an unarmed crowd. Hundreds of people are killed. In fact, there's some estimates that there's thousands are killed. This is the turning point in Russian history. That's the beginning of the end for the royal family. The seeds for social discourse are heightened with Russia's participation in World War I, with 17 million people dying and a further 20 million wounded. In 1917, this is all exacerbated by a famine that threatens the country. Riots demanding bread are commonplace in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the imperial troops join the demonstrators, and the government collapses. 1917, the 15th of March, Nicholas is forced to abdicate. The next day, the Tsar and his family are arrested and sent to Siberia, held captive for over a year. July the 17th, 1918, at dawn, the family are marched down into a basement and they are executed. The royal palaces are packed up. Everything is everything's put on an inventory and put into crates and taken to the Kremlin Armory. 1918, the House of Faberge is nationalized and ransacked. Faberge's whole world collapses around him and he flees to Switzerland. The story goes is that he pretended to be a courier for the British Embassy, and that's how he managed to get out of the country. And he eventually dies 2 years later of a broken heart. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking for 25 minutes, and I can carry on talking for another 25 minutes, but I'm not going to. I haven't talked about where Faberge is today, what's happened to some of those eggs, and I haven't talked about the brand Faberge, because those are both topics that we could go on forever. But I'm happy to take questions. I've heard some great stories already tonight. Anybody like to share something with you, and I can come up with some shocking numbers about what these eggs are worth. So the Lily of the Valley egg, so those 9 eggs that are in the video are in the Faberge Museum. The 9 of them were bought in 2004. They were a part of a collection of Forbes magazine. Have you all heard of the Forbes magazine empire? Well, they at one stage had the largest collection of Faberge eggs and Faberge works of art. And they decided to dispose a number of the pieces, and they called in Sotheby's to help auction off these pieces. And Victor, just right before the auction was about to start, said, "I will offer you a reasonable sum for all those eggs." For 9 eggs, let's see, can anybody get a close estimate to what those 9 eggs we think were bought for? They went for, we think, over $100 million for the 9 eggs. And in terms of an exact understanding of what, Walter, you were asking me about the Lily of the Valley. It's believed to be worth 13 million, that egg. Yes, Sid?
Are there still eggs in private hands?
Yes, there are eggs in private hands. The Queen owns 3. We know that there's a large collection in Russia themselves. I think it's about 10 in Russia, over and above what Victor holds. We know that there's some in Monaco. We know there's some in the US, and a few other places in Europe.
You mentioned one had just been found?
Yes. So, great story. So in 2014, a scrap metal dealer, for whatever reason on a Friday night, is sitting in the kitchen and he decides, I'm going to research these eggs. In fact, I've got a great little picture. I'm going to see if I've got it here. He has an egg sitting in his kitchen next to muffins. And he researches these eggs and he thinks, this could be a Faberge egg. So he calls up an auction house in the UK. You can imagine they immediately fly over because they've seen, he's taken pictures and he's described it. He bought this egg 10 years ago for $13,000. It went on for auction, and this is the most recent egg that was sold. It went on for auction. And any betting people here that would like to guess what that egg sold for? What was that? 33 million that egg was sold for, to a private collector, so we have no idea who bought it, but it's been identified as the 3rd Imperial Egg.
Where was it from?
In the Midwest. They just said the Midwest of the US, and obviously the man who upped that 33 million and some less commission didn't want to know, wanted to remain anonymous. Yes?
Do they know how many eggs were produced?
50. 50 Imperial eggs were produced.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many outside of the Imperial family were produced, but only 47 we know of. Well, we know where they are.
So 3 are missing.
What?
3 are missing.
7.
Oh, 7.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, I could ask you this later, but I've just thought of it now. So, was Carl Faberge the designer and the creator of the eggs, or did he just create it? Who designed?
It's a great question. So when he started out, yes, you'd see him on the drawing board, and yes, you would see him crafting. But one of his, he was an entrepreneurial genius, and he had the ability to coordinate people that could design, people that were cutting stones, people that were creating the pieces, people that were doing the enamel work. So as he became more and more well known, he wasn't at the bench, so to speak, crafting. He was coordinating a huge workshop of people.
Were there any drafts or anything of his pieces as to how they,
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
are there any drafts or prints, like how they started them or anything?
There's some great drawings, and I'll show you in the books that I have here. In fact, I quite like looking at the drawings, the little sketches that they did of the pieces. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, as the likes of Gorbachev and Russia becomes more known to us here in the West, more and more information is released. There's another question.
You speak of the imperial eggs, certainly fascinating, but there was the whole secondary market of little eggs and pins and belt buckles and all sorts of things, which are, I presume, in the market. And there are objects sold as Faberge, but they may not be. I mean, how does one know the authenticity of a real Faberge piece? Are they all marked?
So Faberge, the actual brand Faberge, his sons carried on, they opened up a branch of Faberge in Paris in 1924. They didn't last long, and the rights to that business were bought out, I think, for $20,000. And Faberge brand has gone through various evolutions. Unilever, I'm sure everybody here knows Unilever, that produces like Dove shampoo and Timotei, and they owned the Faberge brand in the 60s. It was then sold to a South African-based company, would you believe, called Hurst Holdings, and they then decided to make Faberge back into a luxury brand, and they brought in a CEO, and they put a lot of money into rebranding the brand. But only recently has a foundation been set up, and two of Faberge's great-granddaughters are involved, and they're now producing the Faberge eggs, and obviously the little eggs are very accessible, most of us can afford those. But I would be very wary between what's happened now and what was happening with Faberge. That period is a very, very grey area, and it looks like the likes of Unilever gave out licenses all over the place to use the Faberge name. There's a great book, I think, on that table of a good craftsman in his own right who was making Faberge eggs, but they weren't sanctioned by any official Faberge business. They're beautiful eggs, they're great, they've been given to, Nelson Mandela, the likes of Nelson Mandela received one, and they do produce the smaller eggs, and there's a great, I don't know if you've heard of the Burlington Arcade in London. There's an outlet there that sells Faberge. Fifth Avenue sells a brand of Faberge. So I would be very, very wary of anything that is branded as Faberge. I'm happy to go through there's some great books here that have got marks. But yeah, anything, I would say after the 20s, I'd be very wary of it being called a Faberge.
That gets to Moscow should go to the Armory Museum, because it does have, I do believe it has eggs, it's so long you can't remember, but there's great items, and the word armory to us makes you think of military, but there's so many other aspects in that museum.
Yeah, I had the privilege a couple of, was it Mitch, my husband will correct me here, was it a couple of years ago? I can't remember. I went to the Met, and the Met have a collection on loan, and there are 3 or 4 eggs in that collection, along with some of the other pieces that you mentioned that Faberge made, and that was just a treat to see. So it's on my bucket list to go to St. Petersburg and see the museum. There's another question over. Yeah, good question. So were there prototypes? Yes, there were prototypes. To make some, take 16 months, 18 months to make something, you would need to be a sort of a production line to get it perfect. Are there any in around now? I have to be honest, I don't know. It's nothing that I've ever researched. I focused on the Imperial Eggs more than anything else. And in terms of the actual craftsmen, we know at the time that the craftsmen were not revered at all. It's only since Faberge's death and since the revival of the Faberge brand through Faberge's great-granddaughters do we know that some of the craftsmen are being recognised. But they in their own right were incredible craftsmen. They just weren't recognised, and that was the norm of the day. Fun doing this. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, my interest, and probably a family interest, has gone back years and years. And I had the privilege of joining my mum on many a buying trip back in London. And I think one of the trips we did, there was a revival at the V&A. I'm sure if you go to the V&A, that's a treasure on its own, just going to the V&A. And they did a whole exhibition on Faberge, and I think these eggs were produced at the time to commemorate this particular exhibition. So they are in the style of Faberge, but they're tin, I'm afraid.